This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Kia ora, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. Now, for today's episode, we're talking about something that I have spoken about at length before on the show. But today we're gonna, it's a topic that I've always taken quite personally, and this time we're talking about it from a systemic point of view. So today we're going to be talking about body positivity, the wave that Ozempic has kind of started in this tidal wave of going back to the early 2000s, even before then, and starting this whole fat-phobic, embracing only skinny bodies. And disclaimer, there's nothing wrong with being skinny. This is not a space for skinny shaming. But I want to talk about the impact of Ozempic, but not from a personal level, because I have spoken about that before on the show, especially with my personal journey. Over the years, I have gained a lot of weight, and I look at older photos and I'm like, I definitely do not look like that anymore. And so even on a personal level, it's been a huge journey, just like accepting my body for how it looks now and being okay with that, especially when there is so much resistance to being okay living in a body that looks like mine. And since Ozempic, I have noticed the resistance has increased even more so. So we will be talking about bodies, but today we're going to be talking about it from a control and capitalism point of view, and as a morality thing, like how it fits in our system, especially how it fits in to the little screen that we all carry around with us all the time, because we cannot deny how social media and our phone usage is really a big prop for this whole conversation that we're going to get into. And the reason why I really, really wanted to make this episode is because the other day I was scrolling through Instagram, as you do, and there's a creator that I follow on there, and they have really cool fashion sense. I just love how colorful their sense of fashion is, and that's the reason why I started following them. I was like, damn, what an inspiration. I need more color in my wardrobe. And so they've recently kind of opened up on their platform about their body and how it's recently changed. And recently they said that they have gained weight, and so and that is a deeply personal thing to bring onto social media, but especially when you are a fashion influencer, that's a huge thing when you have to change your wardrobe. And then they posted a series on their stories. The first one was, they did some post about sweet treats, and someone had commented, "Oh, looks like you don't need any sweet treats," which is awful. And then the next slide on their stories was actually being very, very vulnerable about how, since they have opened up about how they've gained weight, they have lost followers, and it's become a trend about them losing followers. And I think this kind of had me gagged a little bit. I mean, not surprised, but gagged, because it's not because it's not like their content has changed. It's not like their politics have changed. It's not, that they've become boring or their content isn't relevant anymore, but it's because their body has changed. And, we don't just follow people anymore. We follow what their bodies represent, and we consume bodies online as proof of discipline, proof of control, proof of consistency. So, what, we're not like, today's episode is not specifically talking about, whether or not Ozempic works, or how, since Ozempic, we've kind of like gone back to the early 2000s, it seems like. But today we're talking about how, the wave of Ozempic has revealed about control and capitalism and the morality, of bodies in the age of social media. Because I think, when you really think about it, our bodies are not just this personal thing, a living body, but it's like a public asset at this point. If you think about how everything is a brand, we're living in a time of influencers and content creators. And so when we consume to that point, it's not just a personal thing anymore, it's a public asset. And so, what happens when that public asset, and you can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes as I'm saying public asset, because it feels so weird to say that. But when they fail to perform. So let's really get into it. Let's talk about how bodies are brand assets these days. We're living in a time where people have full-time jobs as content creators and as influencers. So, if you're thinking about the creator economy, your body is not just a neutral personal thing. Like, your body is very much part of your product. Without really saying it directly, when your body is a product like that, it communicates, even though it shouldn't, your discipline, your worth, your aspirational value. So if your body changes, it communicates something about you, even if you personally haven't said a word. And it sounds insane when you put it like that. But if you think about the research, there was, according to Pew Research, and this was done in 2023, 59% of adults report that they compare themselves to others on social media. And in 2022, a study in the Body Image Journal found that 80% of young women aged 18 to 30 report that Instagram negatively affects how they view their bodies. And so you cannot deny that if we are living in a world where bodies are part of a product, or part of or marketed in a way where it has some kind of aspirational value, and if you pair that with the fact that we as consumers then compare ourselves to that aspirational value, it is a weird relationship there. I must say it like that, because now none of us are kind of viewing our bodies as personal and part of us and helping us just move through this world. It's part of this product, and we just want to get to that, whatever that looks like or what it means. And also in this framework, there's no room for thinking about health and what health truly means. Because, I've said it before in episodes where we explore fat phobia, but in our fat phobic world, thinness is framed as being healthy, and that's that. There's, in our fat phobic world, there is no way that someone who lives in a bigger body could even be healthy, which is not true. Just because you are thin, it doesn't mean you're automatically healthy. Health can mean so many things. But when we live in a fat phobic world, we're just chasing aesthetic. Like, I remember in my early 20s, I felt as if I was living in a really big body and I was fat, and I thought that was a really bad thing. And I wanted to get into the gym and wanted to eat a certain way so I would lose weight, but none of that was motivated by health. There were some days where I didn't really eat too much, and so I just reached out for sugar. Oh my gosh, those Nutella sandwiches back then, they were the end of me. Oh my gosh. I'm just laughing because I really thought that was health, like the amount of Nutella sandwiches that I had each day. And when I did go to the gym, and I never went consistently enough because I didn't actually care about health, all I did was just go on the treadmill or the elliptical. There was none of those behaviors were motivated by health in any way, shape, or form. And it's absolutely insane how we can absorb that fat phobia. But anyways, Shoshana Zuboff, who is the author of The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, she makes this argument that human behavior is mined as raw material for profit. So, in the creator economy, bodies themselves are literally data in the form of likes, shares, comments, engagement, audience retention. And it's insane when you think about it, because, when we're engaging on social media, there's this contract that we've kind of all signed without saying a word. And this contract is, I will stay aspirational, you will stay loyal. And if you think about what does this actually look like on social media, I'm talking about, creators on, whatever platform it may be, TikTok or Instagram. They post hashtag Transformation Tuesday videos. And I just want to put a small caveat out there. Right now, I'm trying to enter my healthy era. So what does that mean for me personally? It means getting muscle, baby, because the way that I have zero muscle at the moment is it's actually a little bit sad on my days. And I want to be able to, move and do things in life. And I'm going to need muscle for that. And now I have reached the age where if I actively do not use it, I'm going to lose it. Okay. So I need to get onto that. And so when I see journeys that kind of reflect where I want to get to, that is inspirational to me. I'm yes, I love to see that. But what I have noticed with those hashtag Transformation Tuesday videos, and you literally see it in the comments, if it's not this dramatic ass transformation, people are so what did you really do? This is so disappointing. So we have an expectation of how these videos should go and how bodies should look after the fact, which is, which speaks to this unspoken contract that we've all entered. And then you think about what I eat in a day, posts as well. And kind of similar to the Transformation Tuesday videos. If there's examples of the Kai that I want to eat more, I'm yes, that's so cool. But again, I think these expectations of how this food looks like, how it should be consumed, and the type of body that should be consuming food like this. And there's this, I actually can't remember their name now, but there's this TikTok account that I follow. And it's this person, and they've literally titled it, "What a Fat Person Who Doesn't Care About Diet Culture Eats in a Day." And the Kai is amazing. A is balanced, is healthy, homegirl got a fiber, protein, all up in there. It's varied, which I love. I mean, I can watch another video about chicken and broccoli. Like, her food is dope. And even just like the drinks that she makes throughout the day. Okay. Sis is hydrated. Sis is drinking all types of teas. She's making her own like homemade Gatorades. I'm like, yo, this is dope. And so that's the kind of what I eat in a day post that I love. It's motivating to me. But if you think about how it usually goes, there is a formula and an expectation from what we as consumers expect from what I eat in a day posts. And then you also see it with like fitness influencers posting workouts or weight loss journeys. And again, this can be taken with a grain of salt, but most of the time, it's the same expectations put on those workouts or weight loss journeys. That's the same expectations for the What I Eat in a Day and Transformation Tuesday videos. And so, what this is really saying is that when a creator gains weight, this contract broken. So, we as consumers, we interpret that as a failure, engagement drops. And when that happens, the body becomes moralized. And, I'm hearing some of y'all out there and you might be saying, people have always followed ideals. This isn't new. And you know what? That is true. I'm not saying that is false. But if you think about like the social media world that we move in and the monster that is the algorithm. Algorithms amplify judgment, monetize approval, and penalize any deviation. So when you think about it, the stakes are faster, public, and measurable. And that is what makes this ideal and this overall contract a bit problematic. And so, even for yourself, just think about a time when your own body or someone else's became a topic of discussion online. How did that feel? Did you notice your own behavior changing unconsciously? Did you start unconsciously policing your own body for social approval? If it was someone else's body that became a topic of discussion, like what expectations did you put on that person? And there's no shame here, as long as, you're being 100% honest with yourself, because it's times like this where that contract or those expectations really, really, come through. And, if we just rewind this a little bit, like where did this contract come from? And I'm not saying that it's all down to Ozempic, but I have noticed that this contract is looking hella different. The terms of this contract is looking hella different since the rise of Ozempic. So I'm sure everyone knows by now, but Ozempic it's a GLP-1, originally used for type 2 diabetes, but it suppresses appetite, reduces that food noise, and that, helps people lose weight. And it's, widely been adopted in the wellness culture. Just, it's everywhere. And, it's, now there's more options. We have, Saxenda and Wegovy here in Aotearoa. And, I think the thing about Ozempic is that it didn't just change bodies, it changed expectations, and it's low-key become this cultural reset. And I think this cultural reset is why it seems like we are backpedaling on, all of the progress that has been made in the body positivity space, or, why I think this cultural reset is why, like, the rise of the preference for, smaller bodies have become so predominant again. Because if you think about it, before Ozempic, weight loss was this long-term effort. It slow process, asked a lot of, like, the discipline was a slow burner. The struggle was normalized. But since Ozempic, weight loss and just thinness is instant, injectable. Discipline, I mean, it's medicalized. That's what the discipline has become. And now that struggle has become morally questionable. Deborah Lupton, who is the author of The Quantified Self, a sociology of self-tracking, makes this argument that health is now performative. It's visible, it's trackable, and morally judged. And if you think about how this translates into social media, now you're seeing reels of week by week weight loss. You see influencers posting diet and pill routines. You get these posts where it's week 1 versus week 12 on Ozempic. And so, you could make the argument that Ozempic democratizes, weight loss. And I'm not here to say that that is untrue, but that access is uneven. It's expensive, it's medicalized, and it does not address systemic issues like food insecurity or, healthcare access. The reason why I bring this point up is talking about Ozempic as if it's an entirely bad thing, which is not what I'm here to say. It, at the end of the day, it is medicine. And for some people, this path is a really key one to health. And so I'm not here to say that it's a bad thing. But if you think about how the access to that is uneven and how it's kind of set, has been a cultural reset, I do think we need to be careful about how we use it and how it's spoken about. But the way that social media is set up for us to just consume, and it now since Ozempic, the cultural landscape about how we talk about our bodies, how we talk about health, how we talk about weight loss has completely changed. That careful consideration about the ways that Ozempic can be good, I think is completely drowned out by this cultural reset. And I think it's really, really important that we talk about that, especially, when you think about this creator/influencer economy that we're in. Because if we think about, back to the point about why I wanted to make this episode in the first place, this perfectly healthy, to be fair, I don't know what happens behind closed doors. Maybe they're battling something. I don't know. But, this otherwise just judging on appearances and what they've shared on social media, this body that is just living healthy and, bodies do change. They've gained some weight, and have been open about the fact they've gained some weight. Now that they're losing followers, I think we really need to get deep about that. And Lauren Berlant is the author of Cruel Optimism. And there's this interesting quote from this book, which I really, really want to unpack, which is, a cruelly optimistic attachment is when something you desire, like transformation or thinness, actually harms you. So, now we're living in a time where audiences are attached to the fantasy that a body represents. When the body changes, the fantasy collapses, and so followers leave because that fantasy is being shattered. And if you think about how this translates into social media, you can see how us as consumers, we respond when people are honest about post-pregnancy bodies. And, you know, I'm not here to say that being open and honest on social media isn't rewarding in any way, shape or form, because it is. But I'm just thinking about how there's this particular creator on social media, and she's huge. She is huge. And, you know, has a really big platform. Sorry. That's what I meant when I said huge. She's huge on social media, and she has like 4 kids or 5 kids or something. And she gave birth recently, like maybe a couple months ago now. But don't quote me on that. My sense of time is just, it's just shot. A couple of months feels like a couple of weeks ago. But anyways, she gave birth recently and like was making content like maybe 2-3 weeks after she gave birth. And, you know, I'm going to get straight to the point. Her body was snatched, okay? You would never even think that she just recently gave birth. And the comments on her content, and it was like right in your face, right? Because she would wear things that would obviously show off her stomach, or like clothing that was really tight. So it was like, it was right there. And the comment section, you know, there were so many things that were said, but basically that fantasy of like thinness, the desire for that was just dripping in those comments. Whether people said it directly or not, it was dripping in those comments. And so, you know, there are people who are very honest about their post-pregnancy bodies, but then, you know, seeing and then going to the opposite end of the spectrum, like seeing that and then seeing the response to that. I mean, the comment section and the engagement was just very telling about how it doesn't, you know, I think, you know, we as consumers, we can appreciate the realness, but as soon as like that contract is upheld, or, you know, something that is desired is right in front of us, boom, like the realness completely disappears, and it's like this attachment to what we desire is just reignited, and it's this cruel optimistic attachment. It really is. I think Lauren did one with the title of the book, because it is this cruel optimistic attachment which is just strengthened even more. And, you know, there are unfollowed patterns when creators gain weight, or, you know, the interaction changes when there's like, you know, body journey stories that are posted where the progress isn't linear. And so that desire isn't being fanned for us. And so the way that we engage with that, you know, content creator or that particular post, whatever it may be, changes. And, you know, the nuance there is that, you know, whether we are open or honest with ourselves about, you know, the impact of social media on how we view ourselves, that relationship is very much there. A research that was published in the Journal of Youth Studies in 2022 showed that exposure to influencer transformation content increases body dissatisfaction and anxiety in 72% of young adults aged 18 to 25. 72%. And I think that stat just really shows, that cruelly optimistic attachment that we have. It really does show that. And, you could say that, that we as an audience member, as we as consumers are just seeking aspirational content. But the truth to that we cannot ignore is that there's this new moral dimension to this aspirational content, and failure is now publicly punished when that failure to, fuel that desire that we as a society have, even though it is, a weird attachment, when that desire isn't being, we're not being indulged in that desire, you are punished with how we then engage and consume that content. And I think what this really makes it is health as a performance, not a condition, and not condition, sorry. So what's striking about the culture that we live in now is that health has become a performance. So it's not just a private condition, but it's a visible, judged act. And Michael Foucault wrote in The History of Sexuality, wrote about this idea of biopolitics. And so power doesn't just regulate societies, it works through bodies. So discipline, surveillance, and social norms are embedded in everyday practices. And if you think about what this looks like in our day and age now, every meal, workout, or lifestyle choice can be broadcast, judged, and quantified. And I'm doing air quotes right now, healthy bodies become proof of moral virtue. And so the flip side of that is that fatness or appetite becomes a visible site of failure. And so the implication there is health isn't about well-being, it's about performing control and being judged for it. And as with everything, there's always different dimensions to this, and the way that it affects different communities is different as well. Sociologist Sabrina Strings, who is the author of Fearing the Black Body, researches how fat phobia in America is racialized. Thinness has historically been coded as white, disciplined, and morally superior, but Black bodies, especially Black women's, are often, framed as undisciplined or hypersexualized. And social media kind of amplifies these judgments because Black women creators, often face harsher scrutiny for any body fluctuation, and accountability threads, policing, routines, or weight are more common, compared to white creators. And there's research as well that kind of backs this up. So in 2021, a Journal of Adolescent Health study found that exposure to fitness and diet content on Instagram increased body dissatisfaction in 70% of users aged 18 to 30, and Black women were disproportionately targeted by engagement policing. And this, I understand that in a day-to-day basis, when we're scrolling through Instagram, we're not thinking about this message directly. Well, maybe some of you, I can't speak for everyone, but it's definitely, our systems and the story that we're being told is being put down, and we pick it right up when we engage with, what an I eat in a day content that emphasizes moralized meals. It's a story that we pick up when we engage with, fitness reels that highlight discipline over well-being, and when we consume before and after transformations that reward linear progress, which follows a script of living in a really big body to living in a really small body. You can see that those videos just, go viral. The engagement of those are insane, but before and after transformations where it's a lot more nuanced and not as dramatic, those videos do not take off. We as consumers are not interested. And so when you think about content in that realm and what really performs well and what doesn't, it just makes you think about the motivations. It doesn't motivate health as much because, we're interested in what I eat in a day content when the expected body matches that, when there are fitness reels that, don't really highlight well-being but just applaud discipline. And when you think about before and afters that are linear compared to non-linear, it makes you think about the motivation there. The motivation is not health, but more fanning that relationship that we have to that desire. It trains that moral judgment. So when we're living in a world like that, eating, resting, or gaining weight becomes evidence of character. And again, I really want to bring home the point that, some of these platforms and these content creators and influencers can encourage healthier lifestyles, but the system conflates health with visibility, moral worth, and engagement. And we are literally eating it up if you think about what content takes off on social media and what doesn't. We are literally eating this up. And every single time we eat it up, we are reinforcing and reaffirming this story more so, to the point where it's becoming so galvanized that without even thinking about it, we are, dictating, which bodies can and can't be visible, which bodies are morally right, morally wrong. And, because if you think about it, someone can be clinically healthy, yet publicly criticized because their body doesn't perform, to this aspirational ideal. It doesn't fan the flames of desire, because we have got this weird attachment to it. And I think that's what I was trying to say about this particular content creator that started this whole episode is, they can be clinically healthy, and again, I want to put that caveat out there that I don't know what is happening behind closed doors. So I can't say that with 100% confidence. But, someone can be clinically healthy and publicly criticized and seen as a moral failure because their body isn't this following the contract of thinness that we expect. And I think this contract has kind of become renewed with this cultural reset that Ozempic has offered. And yeah, I just think it's so interesting. And if you think about how, it just seemed like a few years ago, body positivity just seemed unstoppable. Social media was flooded with campaigns celebrating bodies of all sizes. We were challenging moralized fatness and normalizing imperfection. I'm just like thinking of Dove's Real Beauty campaigns, which like highlighted diverse shapes and the body positivity trends that we were seeing all over Instagram and TikTok. And then now we've had this Ozempic reset. And I think, I'm going to use Lizzo as an example of like, the landscape that is changing. Because Lizzo has always been a champion for self-love and, champion for larger bodies and body positivity. And, Lizzo has publicly lost weight now. And I think the response to that was telling. And during this conversation, I'm not here to say that Lizzo isn't allowed to lose weight. I mean, health is deeply personal in the sense that, Lizzo does not owe it to us as consumers to tell us what's happening behind closed doors with her health. And as long as she is truly being motivated by health, then, whatever she does to her body is should be what's good for her and for her health. That's what I'm trying to say. But the response to her losing weight, I think, is a perfect example of like this cultural reset that Ozempic has set off. Because there were a lot of people who expressed relief or approval. And I think that reflects this deeply entrenched relationship and idea that we have that thinness is a moral value. But then on the other end of the spectrum, there was a lot of criticism as well, saying, that she had abandoned body positivity and she'd been performing fat identity. And I think this like reaction, and especially the spectrum of this reaction, just shows the impossible standards and expectations that we put on public figures that we then consume. Stay inspirational, stay consistent, stay accountable to a moralized audience. And that's like impossible expectation. And I think Lizzo's experience like illustrates that body positivity can coexist with this moral economy of judgment. And so, when we celebrate weight gain or weight loss, it becomes a site of scrutiny. And it's insane because the culture wants you to exist within a narrative it controls. And I think that the impossible expectations and like the spectrum of reactions that people had to Lizzo, it's like this mad fight happening between like, body positivity and this like cultural reset that Ozempic has offered, where, we should exist within this narrative and this narrative only. And so, the Ozempic reset is at odds with this, body positivity or body acceptance movement, because body positivity or acceptance, it normalized fluctuation and imperfection. But the Ozempic culture has reframed weight loss as instant, controllable, and morally superior. And so, struggle or imperfection, which, was normalized, dare I say celebrated, is now morally suspect. And you can kind of see the tension in these two cultures when there's like audience debates about deserving weight loss versus cheating, using like medical aid. You can see that with the influencers and content creators talking about their Ozempic journeys. So I think this reset shows that, it just showed how fragile cultural progress is when it isn't backed by structural change. And I think that's why this body positivity / body acceptance movement has just like completely just fallen on this ass, and it's just like disintegrated because it was cultural process that wasn't backed by structural change. And I think visibility alone doesn't protect against the return of this moralized thinness catalyzed by Ozempic. And, and I think why it's important that we do, if we want to change the narrative that Ozempic is kind of reset, it needs that structural change, because a 2022 body image study found that positive body representation on social media can improve self-esteem, but only temporarily. Audiences still judge deviations from aspirational norms, and those aspirational norms is thinness. And weight loss culture, especially when it's catalyzed and amplified by things like Ozempic, it quickly, with quickness, reasserts moral hierarchies. And so I think, we really need to be thinking about how can we structurally change this narrative. And so on a practical note, like how can we rethink how we engage with social media? Because, we unpacked a lot today, body politics, moralized thinness, algorithms, this cruelly optimistic attachment to the desire of thinness. But how do we actually take all of this and allow it to give us the opportunity to interact with social media differently. And I think the first thing that we can do is curate intentionally, follow creators who embrace that nuance, that fluctuation and honesty, and really embrace content that's motivated by health, whatever, like truly motivated by health. When there's a big difference between content that is motivated by health compared to content that is motivated by this desire and moralized thinness. And you can mainly tell the difference between those two motivations, because most of the time that content will trigger shame or comparison. So really think about the motivation. And, usually content that is motivated by health truly will embrace that nuance, that fluctuation, and that honesty. And I know that we hear this tip all the time, but, research has found that 64% of users report improved mental health after curating their feeds. 64%, that is significant. And if we even think about our engagement as well, we can ask ourselves, why do I feel compelled to like? I feel like this is the one that will probably hit the most. To comment, share, save, or compare, and really ask yourself, is this engagement, is it admiration? Is it insecurity? Is it moral judgment? I think the third thing that we can do is really resist moralizing bodies, because bodies change, struggle is human. Appetite is normal. Fluctuation is normal. Bodies come in so many different sizes. And even though we are forced to believe that, only thin bodies morally right and beautiful and healthy. That is not the case at all. And so really keeping it real with yourself on like, how can we avoid engaging and commenting on weight as a marker of moral or personal failure? And how can we like engage with nuance? How can we acknowledge that imperfection? How can we, if we're thinking about that contract or that engagement, because it is a two-way relationship, how can we validate creators on social media that highlight their true and honest experiences rather than performative transformation? And I think that begins with noticing emotional responses. Does this content trigger jealousy, admiration, or shame? Even just taking note, whether you do it mentally or actually have a list or, have something, running notes on your phone to track, which accounts encourage reflection versus comparison. And, even just like having how you consume it. I mean, it's so easy to just be on social media all the time. Like even when, like one thing that had me gagged recently was when I was watching the most recent season of Stranger Things. I was like, this dialogue is a little clumsy and like dumbed down, as if like I've forgotten what's happened. And then I looked into it, and Netflix have changed how they write scripts and how they write dialogue, because they know that people are scrolling on their phones while already watching TV, which is insane to me. Like that we just engage so much. So I think, one thing that really helps is like having mindful scrolls. I'm not saying, ideally, yes, limiting how much time we spend on social media is probably the go, but how can we be mindful about our scrolling? Because honestly, social media does not have to be a moral court. It can be a space for honesty, reflection, and humanity, but only if we approach it intentionally. And so as we get to the end of this episode, one thing that I really want to emphasize is that your body is not a brand. Your worth is not a timeline. Your humanity is not a content. And what I think about a culture that cannot tolerate changing bodies is that it cannot tolerate real people. And I think if we think about this cultural reset that Ozempic has catalyzed, just really think about who. And when I say who, I mean what bodies get compassion, who gets correction, and how social media shapes that. And I think if we are honest about that, then maybe, just maybe, we can start engaging online with more nuance, more care, and more humanity. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns, and catch you for the next one.
Thank you for tuning in into another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. To keep spinning the yarns, let us know your thoughts. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Headscarves and Good Yarns, or email us at headscarvesandgoodyarn@gmail.com.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.